What if I told you that miracles don't always arrive with light from heaven? Sometimes they come on four legs, covered in scars the world refuses to see. This is the story of Rex, a war dog everyone believed was broken, and Ethan, a soldier fighting ghosts of his own. Two warriors who found healing not in battle, but in the quiet moments when trust returned and fear finally loosened its grip. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that wounded hearts can still rise, then stay with us. And before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and help us share stories. A dry Nevada wind swept across the desert training compound, carrying dust that shimmered faintly beneath the rising sun. Ethan Cole stood in the gravel yard, boots planted firmly, shoulders squared like a soldier, even though he no longer wore the Navy uniform that had shaped most of his adult life. At 33, Ethan had the kind of body forged from years of calisthenics, maritime operations, and combat drills. Broad chest, thick forearms, and the quiet endurance of someone who had learned to carry weight far heavier than rucksacks. His skin was sun-browned from deployments in unforgiving terrains, and the scars that crossed his left arm carved thin, pale streaks that felt more like entries in a book than wounds. His face was strong-jawed, the jawline slightly shadowed by perpetual stubble. Dark hair cut close to the scalp out of old habit, and eyes a storm-colored blue that once had seen too much, then learned to hide it. He carried himself with the military discipline drilled into him since he was 19. Straight back, deliberate movements, alert gaze. Yet there was a gravity in him now, something quiet and inward, shaped by a series of missions he never talked about, and a farewell ceremony where too many names had been read aloud. Ethan had been in the civilian world for 8 months, but most days he still felt suspended between two realities: the battlefield and whatever life was supposed to be afterward. The Federal K-9 Training Center had offered him structure, purpose, and a way to stay close to service without returning to it fully. That was how he ended up here, assigned to the case no one else wanted. Rex. The trainers called him a problem dog, though they used harsher words when they thought Ethan wasn't listening. The Belgian Malinois stood in his kennel about 20 yards away, watching the yard with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Rex was 4 years old, a muscular 70-pound body wrapped in dense tan and black fur, with a dark mask marking his face like permanent war paint. His posture was exceptional: compact strength, balanced stance, and the coiled tension of an animal bred for precision work. Yet his eyes, an intense amber, carried a discontinuity, as if the dog's mind was split between the present and someplace far behind him. They said Rex had washed out of 3 agencies: failed pairing attempts, failed obedience, failed scent tracking, failed environmental tolerance, failed everything. But Ethan had looked at the performance logs and sensed something else. These weren't failures of ability. They were fractures of memory, the kind soldiers sometimes came back with. He approached Rex's kennel while the morning sun climbed higher, warming the metal fencing. Rex did not bark or growl or even shift his weight. He simply watched. Ethan wasn't sure if Rex was evaluating him or waiting for something else entirely. "Morning, buddy," Ethan said quietly, his voice low and steady, the way he used to speak to teammates beneath the roar of helicopter blades. "Let's give today another shot." He clipped the lead onto Rex's collar. Rex didn't resist, but he didn't participate either. Just lifted his head slightly, as though tolerating the contact. Ethan had handled many dogs before during joint operations: tracking teams, breach detachment canines, explosives units, but he had never encountered one like Rex. The dog's body responded only halfway to commands, but his eyes, they were the eyes of someone solving a puzzle no one else had the pieces to. As they crossed the yard, Ethan felt the gaze of other trainers, some amused, some pitying, most dismissive. Officer Grant Turner, a stocky man in his 40s with a shaved head and the swagger of someone who'd been at the center for too many years, called out from across the yard, "Cole, ready for another round of disappointment?" A few chuckles rose from the other handlers. Turner smirked and resumed training his German Shepherd, who executed a flawless heel on command. Ethan didn't respond. He rarely responded. Turner wasn't malicious, just a man who valued performance above all else, and had no patience for anomalies. But Ethan wasn't here to win the approval of men like him. He was here because he understood what it meant to be misjudged on the basis of scars people couldn't see. Ethan began with simple commands. Heel! Rex took 2 steps, then drifted sideways, gaze fixed on something distant. Sit. Rex sat, but a second too late, like the command had been translated through layers of static. Pivot! Rex froze midway through turning, muscles tightening with confusion rather than defiance. The exercises continued like that, each movement disjointed and hesitant. Rex wasn't resisting. He was searching. Ethan could feel it. Rex was looking for some cue, some signal, some code he had once known by heart. After an hour of near-constant failure, they paused for water. Rex lowered his head to drink, and Ethan noticed something, a subtle but extraordinary behavior. Rex positioned himself with his back toward the center of the yard, facing the open perimeter, eyes scanning each line of sight. It was clean, practiced, instinctive. Not the behavior of a confused dog, the behavior of a sentry, a soldier. Ethan exhaled slowly. No wonder the standard tests meant nothing to him. What happened to you? Ethan murmured. Rex did not look away from the horizon. They continued through the second drill. Environmental obstacles. Rex cleared the first hurdle effortlessly, but when the pneumatic pop of the starter pistol echoed off the metal shed, Rex jolted violently, full body shock, and bolted behind Ethan, nearly tearing the leash from his hand. It took several minutes to coax him out. Not with orders. Orders only made Rex retreat further into himself, but with quiet presence. During the third drill, scent tracking, Rex approached the target box, sniffed once, then backed away as though the exercise offended him. The observing trainers exchanged glances. Turner shook his head. A waste of government resources, he muttered. Some dogs just can't handle pressure. Ethan ignored him, though the words struck something in him. He remembered the pressure he had failed under once, a mission that had fractured his team and carved that haunted look into his own eyes. He knew better than most that pressure didn't break the weak. It broke the wounded. By late afternoon, the sun had turned ruthless. Rex walked beside Ethan in a way that wasn't obedience and wasn't avoidance, more like resignation. As if the dog believed this was simply the shape of his life now. Constant tests he didn't know how to answer. Back at the kennel row, a young trainee approached. Melissa Reyes, 26, petite and sharp-eyed, her brown hair tied tightly in a braid that signaled discipline, offered Ethan a sympathetic look. She had joined the center only 6 months ago, but had the quiet observation skills of someone who paid attention to details others missed. Rough day? She asked. Ethan gave a small shrug. More of the same. Melissa glanced at Rex, her expression softening. He's not like the other dogs. I know. He doesn't look lost, she said. He looks misplaced. Ethan paused at that. Misplaced. Yes, that felt right. As Melissa walked off, he returned Rex to his kennel. The dog entered without resistance and curled into the far corner, facing the chain-link fence instead of Ethan. Something about that small act bruised Ethan more than the day's failures. Most dogs clung to human presence for reassurance. Rex retreated from it, into silence, into stillness, into memory. Ethan sat on the bench outside the kennel row. The sky had turned a deep red, the desert horizon glowing like molten metal. He rested his elbows on his knees, rubbing a hand over his face. He felt the weight of the day settle into him, the way it always had after missions that went poorly. Except this wasn't a mission. It was a dog who no one understood, a dog they were preparing to give up on. You're not broken, Ethan said, voice low. I've seen broken. This isn't that. Rex didn't stir, but Ethan continued, speaking not to win obedience, but to reach something buried. There was a man in my unit, a good man, lost himself after a deployment. Everyone assumed he was weak. They didn't know what he'd carried back. Pain isn't incompetence. It's memory. He watched Rex, searching for the smallest reaction. Nothing. Or maybe a twitch of the ear. I don't know who trained you, Ethan said softly, but whoever they were, they mattered. You keep looking for them. I can see it. The wind shifted, carrying a faint coolness. The compound lights flickered on, bathing the kennels in sterile white. Rex shifted barely an inch, his tail moving just enough for Ethan to see. For this dog, the gesture was monumental. Acknowledgement, not obedience. Ethan leaned his head back, letting exhaustion settle into his spine. "I won't push you where you can't go," he murmured, "but I'm not going anywhere either." The night deepened. Most trainers had gone home hours ago. The yard was quiet except for the rustling of desert brush and the faint hum of the security lights. And in that heavy stillness, Rex finally turned his head. His amber eyes met Ethan's. Not long, not completely. Just a moment, a flicker of trust, fragile and trembling, but unmistakably real. Ethan inhaled sharply, surprised by how much that tiny shift meant to him. He had seen men rebuild themselves from smaller beginnings. He had rebuilt himself from smaller beginnings. "There you are," he whispered. Rex held the gaze for a heartbeat longer, then rested his head on his paws. But the moment was enough. The first crack in the wall between them, the first proof that Rex hadn't shut the world out entirely, and the first promise that tomorrow might be different. Ethan remained beside the kennel even after Rex closed his eyes, letting the night wrap around them both. In the quiet, a single thought settled into him with certainty. This dog had not been lost, just forgotten by the world he once belonged to. And Ethan Cole, scarred, disciplined, stubborn, would not let him fade. Tonight, for the first time, hope stirred. The desert air hung strangely still as the sun bled downward, staining the sky in molten shades of copper and wine. The moment the engines were heard, low, steady, purposeful, Ethan Cole knew these vehicles did not belong to anyone on the federal K-9 roster. There were 3 of them, matte black SUVs that rolled through the gate without hesitation, like the permission they carried was deeper than any written authorization. Ethan stiffened instinctively, shoulders taut beneath his gray training shirt. Years in the Navy had conditioned him to read movement, tone, posture. These men didn't arrive looking for a meeting. They arrived like they were reclaiming something that had been lost. Melissa Reyes, returning from the administrative building with a clipboard against her chest, slowed when she saw Ethan watching the SUVs. "Who are they?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer at first because he didn't know, but everything in him recognized a familiar stillness, the kind that preceded an unspoken hierarchy. The first SUV stopped. Its back door opened, and the man who stepped out carried the unmistakable presence of someone forged in pressure. Commander Blake Harrington, aged somewhere around 45, tall, at least 6'2", with a powerful frame that hadn't softened despite age. His hair was cut close, streaks of steel woven through black, and a deep scar ran diagonally across the right side of his jaw, a pale ridge that looked like the kind of injury earned on nights no one recorded. His face was sharply cut, angular, the lines around his eyes carved by years of desert suns and battlefield decisions. The way he walked, calm, measured, dangerous, told Ethan everything. The man was sealed to the bone, and not just any seal, a leader, a ghost from operations most people would never hear of. 4 men followed him, each dressed in civilian tactical gear, but unmistakably military in bearing. Broad shoulders, deliberate footsteps, eyes that missed nothing. One of them, a bald operator with dark skin and a jagged scar across his eyebrow, carried himself with the coiled readiness of someone who had survived more than one firestorm. Another, lean with sandy hair and a trimmed beard, scanned the facility like memorization was instinct. Ethan's heartbeat thudded harder, not with fear, but recognition. These were not police trainers. These were special operations soldiers, high tier. "Cole," Turner muttered as he approached, frowning. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan shook his head once. "Don't know." But when Blake Harrington's gaze lifted and locked onto Rex's kennel, Ethan suddenly understood that the man hadn't come for a conversation, a tour, or a courtesy inspection. He had come for Rex. The dog, who moments ago had been resting quietly, lifted his head with a slow, almost ceremonial precision. His gaze sharpened. His muscles tightened. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just stared at the man approaching, as if a dormant algorithm had come online inside him. Blake stopped 10 feet from Ethan. His eyes were gray, storm gray, metallic, unflinching. "You're Cole," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, with a rasp that sounded like it had been carved by sand and war. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." Blake didn't return the courtesy nod. His attention had already shifted to Rex. Something ancient, something solemn passed through his expression. "Ghost," he said quietly. "Do you still know me?" Ethan felt the name like a punch to the chest. Ghost, not Rex. Ghost. The name wasn't a pet name. It was a call sign, a designation, a past. Blake brought 2 fingers to his lips and emitted a whistle, sharp and precise, carrying a tonal pattern Ethan had never heard in police or civilian work. Rex transformed. Instantly. His spine straightened, head lifted, ears pricked forward. His eyes, once dimmed by confusion, cut into laser clarity. Ethan watched, stunned, as the dog held perfectly still, every fiber of muscle alert yet composed. Not fear, not startled response, recognition, a memory reactivated. Blake exhaled, something unreadable flickering across his face. He remembers. The sandy-haired operator stepped closer. "Sir, after all this time?" "Ghost remembers everything that matters," Blake replied, voice tight with conviction. Melissa gasped softly behind Ethan, but Ethan himself didn't move. His hands were cold despite the heat. "What is this?" he asked. Blake looked at him with a weight that pressed like truth too heavy to set down. "He's not Rex. Not the way you think." He turned fully toward Ethan. "Your dog was part of a classified joint program under Naval Special Operations Command. Codename Night Vale." Turner, who had been standing slightly behind Ethan, scoffed. "With respect, Commander, that dog can't even complete a simple recall. Night Vale dogs would eat half this facility." Blake shot him a look that froze the man mid-breath. "Night Vale dogs operate under protocols you can't even imagine. Their training is deeper than commands. It's embedded memory. Ghost isn't failing because he doesn't know what to do. He's failing because you're asking him the wrong questions." Ethan swallowed. His file was blacked out. "Of course it was," Blake said. "Ghost belonged to a handler named Mason Holt. They worked together for 3 years, 9 missions, 0 failures." Ethan felt something inside him tighten. What happened to Holt? Blake's jaw clenched. The scar along his cheek whitened as the muscles beneath it flexed. "Syria, a raid along the northeastern border, building full of IEDs. Intel said we had 20 minutes. Someone on the ground triggered the charges early." Blake's voice lowered, gritty around the edges. "Holt didn't make it. Ghost stood over him for 5 hours under enemy fire until we could extract the body." Melissa lifted a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, feeling a shiver crawl down his spine. Ghost, no, Rex, hadn't been reacting to fear in the simulations. He had been reacting to memory. Afterwards, Blake continued, Ghost was transferred to a military vet center for rehabilitation, but some idiot filed the wrong classification. He fell through the cracks, got flagged as unsuitable for service, and ended up in the civilian sector. "And nobody corrected it?" Ethan asked, disbelief edging into his tone. "We didn't know," Blake answered. "Not until a contact forwarded me a note about a Malinois showing signs of advanced pattern scanning and protective posturing during breaks." Ethan blinked. "You mean the things he does when he thinks no one is watching?" "Exactly that," Blake confirmed. "Those are operational habits. Ghost wasn't designed for standard obedience. He was designed for unspoken battlefield coordination." Ethan turned to look at Rex. Ghost, whose eyes were still locked on Blake, as if the entire world had narrowed to a single point. "So why now?" Ethan asked. "Why come back for him?" Blake's expression changed, softened in a way that surprised Ethan. "Because he deserves to know whether there's anything left of him worth saving. Because if he still remembers who he is, then he deserves more than being labeled broken." He stepped closer to the kennel. "And because you, Cole, did something no one else bothered to do." Ethan frowned slightly. "What's that?" "You waited for him," Blake said. "You didn't force submission. You earned trust. Night Vale dogs respond only to operators who understand loyalty under fire. Ethan swallowed hard. He hadn't expected praise, certainly not from a man whose aura felt carved from iron. Blake stepped back, drawing in a slow breath. I want to run one final test. Something only Ghost will understand. A test? Ethan asked. A ghost run, Blake said. A simulation of battlefield conditions. No commands, no leashes, no interference, just instinct. Turner let out a nervous laugh. You're going to put this dog on a tactical course? He couldn't find a scent box this morning. Blake didn't even look at him. He wasn't looking for your scent box. The bald operator, whose presence radiated quiet danger, spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, steady, edged with decades of control. Night Vale dogs don't work with artificial targets. They learn to identify human fear, adrenaline signatures, the micro behaviors of hostiles. They do more than track. They read the field. Ethan felt a chill. And you think he still remembers all that? Blake met his eyes. We'll find out. Rex Ghost shifted his stance slightly, pressing one paw forward, weight distributed perfectly across his limbs. Ethan's stomach twisted. The dog was ready. Too ready. Like hearing Blake's voice had pulled threads of purpose out of the ashes inside him. Blake looked at Ethan. He's waiting for your call. You're the one he trusts right now. I saw it the second you walked out with him. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. Trust. Ghost trusted him. After all the failures, after all the confusion, after all the days where Ethan had sat quietly beside him in the dark. He looked down at the dog, whose amber eyes flicked to him. There were no words in the gaze, no commands needed, just a question. A request. A soldier asking permission to return to the fight. Ethan exhaled slowly. If he wants to run it, he leaned closer. Then he has my trust. Ghost's ear twitched, a tiny sign, but unmistakable. Blake nodded once sharply. Then we begin at dawn. And as the last of the light bled away, Ghost stepped closer, not to Blake, but to Ethan, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg, as though seeking confirmation. Ethan placed a steady hand on the dog's back, feeling the hardened muscle beneath fur, the vibration of anticipation. Ghost had chosen, and tomorrow the world would learn whether the warrior inside him still lived. The mock village lay silent beneath the early morning haze, its plywood walls tinted blue by the dim pre-dawn light, giving the place an eerie quality, as though the structures breathed in the desert stillness, waiting for something old and restless to awaken. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the training perimeter, boots rooted in the dusty ground, heart steady but heavy. The air was cool enough to raise goosebumps down his muscular arms, though the shiver running through him had little to do with the temperature. It was anticipation, dread, and something deeper, a quiet hope he hadn't yet dared to name. Rex stood beside him, the Belgian Malinois taut as a drawn bow, body wrapped in streamlined muscle and instinct. Gone was the distant, unfocused look Ethan had seen for weeks. Rex's amber eyes were sharp, alive, fixed not on the obstacles but on the mission he somehow already understood. His breathing was slow, measured, not the panting of anxiety, but the controlled oxygen rhythm of a professional preparing for a task embedded so deeply it had outlived memory. Commander Blake Harrington approached them from the opposite side of the yard, moving with the heavy purpose of a man who had relived too many missions in the dark hours of dawn. Blake was dressed in civilian tactical gear, simple black fatigues, boots polished without shine, his broad shoulders squared like steel beams beneath the fabric. The scar on his jawline caught the faint morning light, turning the old wound into a pale stripe across rugged skin. Behind him walked two SEAL operators, Cole Freeman and James Teller, silent as shadows, both watching Rex with the cautious awe of men who knew exactly what Malinois of this caliber could do when awakened. Sergeant Dorsey, a compact, square-shouldered man in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and permanent suspicion etched between his brows, stepped closer to Ethan. Cole, he muttered, rubbing a hand over his chin. I don't like this. That dog is unpredictable. We're not equipped for whatever these guys think they're doing. Ethan kept his gaze straight ahead. He's not unpredictable. He's misunderstood. Same thing, Dorsey snapped. No, Ethan said quietly, firmly. Not at all. Blake halted a few feet away. Cole, he said, voice deep as gravel. Bring him forward. Ethan guided Rex to the start point. The dog moved with a precise, deliberate rhythm that reminded Ethan of men he had served beside. Operators who wasted no motion, no energy, no breath. Melissa Reyes jogged across the yard with a small case of safety gear. Her dark braid bounced against her shoulder as she approached, eyes wide with tension. Ethan, she said softly, are you sure about this? She was 26, slender but fit, with a habit of observing rather than reacting, traits that would make her an excellent handler one day, if she ever chose that path. Today, however, she looked like someone watching a live charge being carried into a dry room. He's sure, Blake answered for Ethan, and so is Ghost. Rex's ear flicked at his former name, a subtle acknowledgement. Melissa swallowed. Just stay safe, she murmured, stepping back. A cluster of other trainers, Turner among them, gathered near the perimeter, their faces marked by skepticism, fear, or thinly veiled curiosity. They had heard rumors. They had seen the transformation in Rex the day Blake arrived. But none of them believed this dog could do what Blake claimed. Blake chambered the single blank round into the Remington 870 shotgun, lifted it, and looked around the village. No commands, he reminded everyone. No interference. Ghost will operate on instinct. Ethan's breath hitched. This wasn't training. This was resurrection. Blake raised the shotgun. The world held its breath. Then, boom! A thunderous blast fractured the morning stillness, echoing through the plywood alleys like shrapnel through the dark. Before the last vibration faded, Blake whistled, a single sharp note, thin but piercing. And Rex, Ghost, was gone. He shot forward like lightning summoned from the ground, body flattening into a streamlined sprint, paws pounding dust in silent bursts. Ethan felt a visceral jolt, as if his heart were trying to run after him. The trainers gasped. Some cursed. Turner muttered, "What the hell?" But Ethan's eyes never left Rex's form. The dog moved like water poured downhill, fluid, seamless, inevitable. He reached the first structure and slipped along the wall, his body hugging the plywood edge with the precision of someone anticipating enemy sightlines. Ethan could almost see the mental calculus happening inside Rex's mind. Angles, distances, shadows, auditory fragments, airflow patterns. The dog paused, scanned left, then right, quick, exact motions. He wasn't sniffing for a target. He was mapping a battlefield. Rex darted through the first doorway, clearing the corner with a tight arc that would have impressed any elite breacher. His steps were soundless, his breathing steady. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, something between pride and grief. This was a soldier, a veteran, a survivor. And every move he made whispered the remnants of missions no civilian course could ever replicate. Inside the first building, Rex dismissed a decoy scent instantly, nudging past it with almost disdainful efficiency. Teller's eyebrows shot up. "Sir," he said to Blake, "he still remembers hostile scent discrimination." Blake nodded once, jaw tight. "Night Vale dogs don't forget." Rex exited the structure and cut across an alley, weaving between broken barriers without so much as brushing a surface. He checked elevation hazards by glancing upward, scanning for vantage points. Then he leaped over a collapsed barrel and landed in complete silence. Turner whispered to no one, "That's impossible." Melissa bit her lip. "Not impossible, extraordinary." Rex reached the second structure and slowed, shoulders low, weight shifting as he detected something. Ethan held his breath. The target decoy was inside. The scent was faint, synthetic human stress pheromones, designed to mimic someone terrified hiding. Rex didn't rush. He listened. The sun crested the edge of the training wall, casting thin golden blades across the village. Dust motes shimmered like embers suspended in the air. Rex eased toward the doorway, nose lifting slightly, then angled himself to present a smaller profile, exactly how operators approached hostile thresholds. Then with one smooth motion, he slipped inside. Silence. A long, breathless silence. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Blake didn't blink, Dorsey's knuckles whitened around the fence. Then Rex emerged, not with the target decoy in his mouth, not barking or signaling standard police protocols. Instead, he positioned himself beside the door, standing alert with weight balanced evenly on all four paws. Not sitting, standing guard. Teller inhaled sharply. "He's guarding the extraction route," Freeman murmured. "Holy hell, he's running the mission exactly." Blake stepped forward. "Ghost," he said quietly, voice thick with something close to reverence. "Show me the path." Rex turned his head and trotted toward the back corner of the building, stopping at a point where two walls created a natural chokehold. Blake examined it and let out a low breath. He picked the most defensible position in the entire structure. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Ghost hadn't just found the target. He had neutralized the threat environment. He had built a perimeter. He had done the job of a specialized operator. Blake faced the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, this dog just executed advanced tactical protocol without a single command." Turner looked sick. Dorsey's mouth hung open. Melissa's eyes glistened, her throat bobbing with awe. Ghost stood perfectly still until Blake gave a subtle hand signal. Then, only then, did the dog relax, dropping from battle state into calm readiness. But what happened next broke something open inside Ethan. Ghost turned, not to Blake, not to the SEALs, not to the trainers watching from behind the fence. He ran straight to Ethan, not sprinting, no. It wasn't frantic excitement. It wasn't overwhelmed relief. It was a purposeful approach, as though the dog had made a decision forged from memory, instinct, loyalty, and choice. When Ghost reached him, he pressed his head against Ethan's hand, firm, intentional, grounding. Ethan felt the heat of the dog's body, the pulse thrumming beneath fur, and something inside him, something that had been dormant since the last funeral he attended in uniform, sparked back to life. He lowered his hand slowly, fingers curling into the thick fur at Ghost's neck. "Good boy," he whispered, voice cracking. Blake stepped toward them, expression softened with bittersweet pride. "He picked you," Blake said quietly, "after everything, after what he's lost, after what he remembers. He chose you." Ethan swallowed hard, unable to speak. Ghost leaned into his leg, tail just barely wagging, a single, silent gesture of trust. Blake's smile was small, weary, but genuine. "Take him home, Cole," he murmured. "He's yours now, whether you think you're ready or not." The afternoon sun spilled molten gold across the Nevada training facility, casting long shadows that stretched over the gravel like dark fingers, trying to hold on to the last remnants of daylight. Ethan Cole stood at the entrance of the administrative building, hands still faintly trembling with the adrenaline that had not yet finished leaving his system. He had watched a miracle unfold that morning. Now he was watching its consequences. Inside the conference room, the air held the tension of unsaid judgments and shifting hierarchies. A cluster of senior staff members sat at the table with rigid posture, various files spread in front of them. Ethan, still wearing dust from the mock village on his boots, waited near the door with Rex sitting silently pressed against his right leg. Rex's presence had changed since the Ghost run. Calmer but sharpened, like a blade finally remembering its edge. Ethan rested his palm briefly on the dog's back, grounding both of them. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Whitmore stepped into the room first, signaling the meeting's start. She was around 38, tall and slender, with a posture that announced military training long before she opened her mouth. Her brown hair was tied in a severe bun, drawing attention to her striking features. Angular cheekbones, piercing hazel eyes, and skin lightly tanned from years of deployments. Her demeanor was controlled, precise, almost surgical. She carried herself with an air of quiet command that made even seasoned officers straighten instinctively. Sarah worked for the Department of Defense as a behavioral intelligence officer, specializing in K-9 trauma response and classified programs. She was one of the few civilians permitted to know of Night Vale's existence, and she had come to decide whether Rex, Ghost, still belonged in the fight. Blake Harrington stood near the end of the table, arms folded across his broad chest. Beside him were Cole Freeman and James Teller, the two SEAL operators who had accompanied him earlier. Their expressions were unreadable. though Ethan could sense pride radiating from them. Pride and sorrow, because they had seen what Rex remembered and what he had lost. Sarah opened a folder, her voice cool and clipped. Commander Harrington, this report indicates that the dog formerly designated Ghost displayed significant operational behavior during the tactical simulation. Ethan flinched at the phrasing. The dog, as though Ghost were an object, not a soldier. Blake's jaw tightened. He didn't display behavior. He executed a mission. Sarah's eyes flicked upward, fixing him with an unblinking stare. Be that as it may, we must determine whether his capabilities pose a risk to civilians, and if he is salvageable. Ethan's hand curled into a fist at his side. Salvageable, as though Ghost were some broken engine part. Sarah shifted her attention to Ethan. Mr. Cole, you were present for the assessment. Your observation? Ethan raised his chin slightly. Rex, Ghost, performed with discipline and tactical intelligence. What he did would challenge most police K-9 units. And he did it calmly. Until the next trigger setting him off, Turner muttered from the far side of the table, leaning back with arms crossed. His stocky frame barely fit in the chair, but his ego filled the room. We've all seen it. He hears a gunshot wrong and collapses into panic. That's not a working dog. That's a liability. Ethan wanted to snap at him, but Sarah spoke first. Mr. Turner, your input is noted. However, your tone is not. Turner immediately quieted, the reprimand cutting cleanly through his bravado. Sarah returned her gaze to Ethan. Continue. Ethan took a breath. Ghost doesn't panic for no reason. He responds to memory, trauma, and unlike most K-9s, he doesn't shut down entirely. He waits. He tries to reorient. He's fighting through it. Sarah regarded him curiously, her expression softening at the edges. You speak of him as though he's human. Ethan didn't blink. Sometimes it feels close. She closed the folder slowly. Ghost's performance today forces us to reconsider his classification. Blake stepped forward slightly. He's not a failure. He's a veteran. Sarah nodded once. Agreed. His status will be updated to Special Tactical Asset, Limited Duty. He is not to be deployed in high-risk operations again, but his capabilities are too advanced to disregard. Ethan felt something inside him loosen, relief but bittersweet. Ghost would not be sent back into war. He had already given enough. Sarah then looked directly at Ethan, her hazel eyes assessing him with an intensity that felt unsettling. Mr. Cole, you are being considered for a new assignment. Ethan stiffened. Assignment? You have demonstrated an unusual rapport with Ghost. You calmed him during episodes, you engaged him without demanding compliance, and, most importantly, he chose you. Ethan swallowed. So what does that mean? Sarah clasped her hands behind her back. It means you will develop a rehabilitation protocol for K-9 units suffering from trauma-induced behavioral fragmentation, a system the military may one day adopt for retired or wounded operational dogs. Ethan blinked, stunned. Turner scoffed. We're putting him in charge? The new guy? Sarah didn't look at Turner, but her tone was enough to flatten him. The new guy is the only handler who reached Ghost, and for this program, that is the only qualification that matters. Ethan glanced down at Rex. The dog's amber eyes watched him steadily, quietly, as though he already knew this moment was coming. Sarah continued, Your role will be civilian, but with clearance to interact with classified components relevant to the rehabilitation process. Blake added, voice softer than before, This isn't a demotion, it's a trust. Ethan nodded. I understand. Sarah closed her folder. That concludes the classification review. Chairs scraped lightly as people stood. Sarah approached Ethan as the others began filing out. Up close, she looked less austere, her sharp features softened by a quiet compassion threaded beneath the professional mask. You should know, she said quietly. There were many who believed Ghost would never function again. They were wrong, Ethan replied. Sarah offered a faint smile. Yes, but only because someone finally saw him. Then she stepped away, walking with precise strides down the hallway. Ethan exhaled and looked at Rex, who pressed gently against his leg. "We're not done, bud," Ethan whispered. "Not by a long shot." Training began the next morning, but it was training unlike anything Ethan had done before. The standard drills were discarded entirely. No obedience tests, no forced exposure, no shock and response conditioning. Instead, Ethan built a series of low-pressure exercises for Rex, walking slowly along the perimeter, exploring open areas, practicing basic scent recognition without stress. Rex responded with growing confidence. Each day, Ethan learned more about the dog's triggers, certain metallic snaps, echoes, and abrupt vibrations that sent micro-tremors through Rex's muscles before he managed to steady himself. And Ethan learned how to help him through it, breathing slowly, lowering himself beside Rex, anchoring the dog's attention to something predictable and safe. As they worked, Sarah visited periodically, observing with quiet interest. She never interfered, never offered corrections. She simply watched, with an acuity that made Ethan think she was studying him almost as much as Rex. Blake left the facility 2 days after the Ghost run, but before he did, he had pulled Ethan aside. "Ghost is alive because of you," Blake had said, voice low. "But don't forget, saving him means saving yourself too." Ethan hadn't known how to respond, because Blake was right. There were nights Ethan still woke drenched in cold sweat, memories clawing at him, flashbangs, smoke, the metallic scent of blood, the sinking realization that some missions didn't end when the firing stopped. And somehow Rex understood. They were scarred in different ways, but the damage spoke a language both recognized. One afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and cast a long, copper glow across the sand, Ethan released Rex from the leash for the first time in the open yard. There was no test, no objective, just freedom. Rex trotted beside him at first, then slowed, then drifted back into position by Ethan's leg as though they had been walking together for years. No commands, no tension. Just two soldiers who had endured too much learning how to breathe again. Ethan felt Rex's gaze before he saw it. He looked down. Rex's tail wagged. Not a faint flicker, not an uncertain twitch. A full, slow, deliberate wag. Ethan's chest tightened with unexpected emotion. He reached out, brushing his rough palm through Rex's fur. "We're okay now," Ethan murmured, voice thick. "From now on, I've got you." And as the desert swallowed the light, Ethan, Cole, and Rex walked the perimeter like two shadows that had finally found a place to rest. No leash, no mission, no ghost behind them. Only healing, only home. The morning light stretched across the desert like a slow unfurling banner, thin streaks of rose gold painting the horizon. Ethan Cole arrived early, as he always did these days, boots crunching lightly over the gravel, breath forming faint clouds in the cooling autumn air. The Nevada heat had finally begun to ease, leaving behind a crispness that clung to the edges of every inhale. Rex walked beside him without a leash, his gait steady, his head held high, not in arrogance, but in rediscovered purpose. No longer the dog who cowered beneath trucks or hesitated at shadows, Rex now moved with the quiet authority of a soldier who knew the battlefield but was learning, slowly, how to exist beyond it. Today was not a test, not a simulation, not even a training day. It was evaluation day, the day the upper administration would determine whether Ethan's newly developed K-9 trauma support program would become an official model for federal and military K-9 rehabilitation. And though he stood like carved stone, calm and prepared, Ethan felt the old weight coil inside his sternum. He hadn't felt this particular kind of tension since waiting for extraction calls overseas. That blend of hope and dread, anchored by responsibility heavier than any gear pack. The administrative building buzzed lightly with distant voices. Inside, a team of evaluators would be preparing their questions, their metrics, their scrutiny. Ethan wasn't afraid of scrutiny, but he was afraid of one thing: failing Rex. Failing the one soul who had placed absolute trust in him. A voice broke his thoughts. "You're early again." Ethan turned to see Dr. Lila Monroe, the newest addition to the program's oversight team. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender with long auburn hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Her skin was fair with a scattering of freckles across her nose. and her soft gray eyes held both intelligence and kindness, rare in a field that often hardened everyone it touched. Lila was a trauma specialist veterinarian brought in to help assess long-term psychological recovery in K9 units. She walked with an unhurried gait, the kind of calm that came from years spent tending to broken animals and broken people alike. Ethan nodded a greeting. Couldn't sleep, Lila smiled knowingly. You've carried far worse pressures. This one is different, though, isn't it? Ethan looked at Rex, who was nosing the desert air as if checking wind currents like a sniper would. Yeah, he murmured. This one matters more. Lila knelt to Rex's level. Good morning, Rex. Rex looked at her briefly, tail flicking once. Lila laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment. As she stood, Ethan noticed the faint smudge of fatigue beneath her eyes. Long night, she nodded. Read through all your program notes. You weren't kidding, Ethan. You've been working. It's for him, Ethan said simply. Lila's voice softened. And maybe for you, too. Ethan didn't reply, because her words landed too close to truth. He had built the program for Rex, yes, but also for every ghost he carried, every fallen teammate, every soldier who had returned home wearing invisible wounds. Before they could continue, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Whitmore strode across the yard, sharp and efficient as always, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Her hazel eyes swept the area, assessing both men and dog with practiced precision. Cole, she greeted. Dr. Monroe. Ma'am, Ethan replied. Sarah's gaze fell on Rex. You know what today represents? Ethan nodded. A chance to prove this works. A chance, Sarah repeated. Not a guarantee. Rex stepped closer to Ethan, nudging his leg gently. The grounding gesture he'd learned to use whenever he sensed Ethan's rising tension. It amazed Ethan how deeply the dog had begun reading him, how naturally their emotional signals intertwined. Sarah noticed and nodded approvingly. That bond is your strongest evidence. Before Ethan could respond, Turner approached from across the yard. His presence was as unwelcome as ever, his stocky frame wrapped in a smug confidence that didn't quite fit the moment. His scowl was directed at Rex. So today's the day, huh? Turner muttered. We decide whether the broken dog stays. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Rex stepped forward, silent, still, but unmistakably protective. Not aggressive, just present. Lila laid a firm hand on Turner's arm. Maybe choose your words with more care. Turner grumbled something under his breath and walked off. Rex relaxed instantly. Sarah sighed. Ignore him. He assumes anything he doesn't understand must be a flaw. Then he must spend a lot of time disappointed, Lila remarked. Ethan smirked despite himself. The evaluation began in the main training hall, an open-air structure with retractable walls and rows of exposed steel rafters. Sarah, Lila, and two additional evaluators stood before Ethan. One was David Morrow, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with silvering hair, deep-set eyes, and the stern but fair expression of someone who had spent decades in military oversight. The other was Captain Irene Shaw, a compact woman in her mid-30s, with close-cropped black hair, deep brown skin, and a sharp, analytical gaze that missed nothing. Her expression was neutral, but her posture radiated disciplined intensity. These are the final review officers, Sarah explained. Today we evaluate the viability of your program, not Rex's tactical performance. Understand? Ethan nodded. Understood. Captain Shaw stepped forward. Her voice was crisp, slightly gravelly. Mr. Cole, our primary objective is assessing how behavioral trauma rehabilitation, might be standardized. Demonstrate whatever you feel best represents your method. Ethan nodded and turned to Rex. The dog sat calmly, waiting. He began with simple grounding exercises. Not obedience drills, but trust drills. Ethan walked Rex through breathing patterns, low-pressure scent tasks, and proximity pacing. Rex performed smoothly, but not perfectly, and Ethan made no effort to hide the imperfections. Because the program wasn't about perfection, it was about healing. As Ethan guided Rex through each exercise, he explained the underlying trauma responses and the specific strategies used to redirect Rex away from memory-triggered panic. Shaw listened intently. Morrow occasionally nodded. Sarah watched with a faint, approving smile. Lila looked almost proud. Everything went well, until a metal panel slammed shut somewhere outside, likely the wind catching it. The sound cracked through the hall like a bullet. Rex froze. His muscles locked. His pupils expanded. His breathing stuttered into high-alert hyperventilation. The world around him shrank into a tunnel of remembered fear. The evaluators tensed. Ethan didn't. He dropped to one knee beside Rex, not in front, not blocking, just beside him, shoulder to shoulder. His voice was low, steady, rhythmic. "Easy, buddy. Right here. You're not alone. Breathe with me." He inhaled slowly, 5 seconds. Exhaled slower, 7 seconds. Rex's breathing began to sink, still shaky but guided. Ethan continued, voice strong but soft. "You're safe. Not Syria, not the battlefield. Here, with me." Rex's trembling eased, his pupils normalized, his body loosened. And then, in a decision entirely his own, Rex leaned against Ethan, grounding himself fully. The evaluators exchanged looks. Lila wiped a tear discreetly. Sarah whispered, "Extraordinary." When Rex recovered fully, Ethan stood. "This is the point," he said quietly. "He doesn't need to be perfect. He needs to know he's not alone when he's vulnerable. That's what this program is." The room remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, Captain Shaw stepped forward. "Mr. Cole." She paused, studying Rex and Ethan with unwavering intensity. "This program is viable. More than viable, it's necessary." Morrow added, "You've redefined what rehabilitation can be." Sarah's expression softened into a rare, genuine smile. "Congratulations, Cole." Ethan exhaled slowly. Relief washed over him, warm and deep. But the moment was made whole only when Rex's tail brushed against his leg, one gentle wag. Hours later, with the sun descending into a horizon painted in bruised purples and burning gold, Ethan walked the outer fence line with Rex at his side. No leash, no commands, just companionship. The desert wind cooled as night approached, lifting faint sand swirls around their boots. Rex trotted close, not out of fear but comfort, healing. Ethan paused halfway along the fence line and knelt, resting a hand on Rex's neck. "You did good today," he murmured. Rex looked up at him, eyes no longer haunted, but deep, warm, alive. Then the dog's tail lifted and wagged. One strong, deliberate motion, the kind that spoke of trust rebuilt, of loyalty chosen freely. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest, something heavy finally loosening. He smiled, voice thick with emotion. "We're good now, old friend. From here on out, I protect you." Rex pressed his head into Ethan's hand, sealing the promise. And under the desert sunset, 2 warriors, one human, one canine, walked forward into whatever future awaited them. No longer broken, no longer lost. They had found home. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not the ones that split the sky open or shake the earth beneath our feet. Sometimes a miracle is simply a wounded soul choosing to trust again, a heart learning to heal, or a warrior, man or dog, finding the strength to stand up one more time. In our everyday lives, we walk past people carrying invisible scars just like Rex and Ethan did. Some fight silent battles, some break quietly, and some wait, just like Rex, for someone patient enough, kind enough, brave enough to stay beside them until the fear fades and the light returns. Maybe you are that person for someone. Maybe someone is waiting to be that person for you. Or maybe God himself is whispering that you are not alone, that healing takes time, but miracles are still real, in loyalty, in compassion, in second chances. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment so we can hear your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of courage, faith, and redemption. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your steps every single day. And may every scar you carry become part of the miracle He is shaping in your life.